Anxiety isn't your enemy, it's fuel. Here's how. We're diving deep into how anxiety, often seen as something to push down, can actually help you grow.
Yeah, that's right. We're so conditioned to think of it as a bad thing. But the 19th century philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, he had a very different take.
Okay.
He called anxiety the dizziness of freedom.
Dizziness, freedom. Okay, I'm intrigued, but also a bit confused.
Well, think of it like this. You're at work, got a huge project, and there are so many ways to approach it. It's overwhelming, right?
Right.
Or in your relationships, like making decisions about the future can feel totally paralyzing.
Yeah.
Every choice we make opens up all these new possibilities, good and bad. That's the dizziness.
I see. So it's not just the pressure to make the right choice, it's the sheer volume of options that makes us anxious.
Exactly. Kierkegaard's point is this anxiety is actually a sign of our freedom to choose. It means we're not just robots programmed to follow a set path.
So instead of dreading that anxiety, we can see it as a signal that we're actually in the driver's seat of our lives.
Precisely. And here's where Kierkegaard gets really radical. He saw anxiety as a catalyst for growth. It pushes us to confront those possibilities, to define ourselves through the choices we make.
So in a way, by leaning into that anxiety, we're actually taking ownership of our freedom and who we want to become.
Exactly. Now, it's important to acknowledge that not everyone sought anxiety in this positive light. Freud, for example, he connected anxiety to past traumas, particularly the trauma of birth.
Right.
He saw it as something that could be useful, like as a warning signal, but also potentially destructive when it becomes excessive.
So there's a spectrum when it comes to anxiety.
Yeah.
A healthy amount that can motivate us, and then an unhealthy level that can be harmful.
That's right. And another interesting contrast is Nietzsche, who believed in the transformative power of anxiety. He saw it as a challenge to overcome, a force that could push us to become stronger and more resilient.
So we've got Kierkegaard saying anxiety comes with freedom, Freud cautioning about its potential downsides, and Nietzsche embracing it as a path to growth. Seems like there's a lot to unpack here.
Absolutely. But instead of getting lost in the philosophical weeds, let's bring it back to you, the listener. How can you shift your mindset to start seeing anxiety not as an enemy, but as fuel for personal growth? One of the most powerful things you can do is shift from trying to eliminate anxiety to learning to manage and utilize it.
So instead of thinking, oh no, not this again,
Yeah.
we should be thinking, okay, my anxiety is telling you something. What is it?
Yes, instead of seeing it as a threat, see it as a signal, maybe even a teacher. It's about leaning into the anxiety, facing it head on rather than trying to avoid it.
It's about getting curious about our anxiety rather than letting it control us. But how do we actually do that? It's easy to say lean in, but what does that look like in practice?
One way is to practice mindfulness. When you feel anxious, pay attention to your physical sensations, your thoughts, your emotions. Don't judge them, just observe them. This can help you create some distance between you and your anxiety, make it feel less overwhelming.
That makes sense. It's like taking a step back and becoming an observer of our own anxiety rather than getting swept away by it.
Exactly. And another key is to reframe your anxiety. So instead of thinking, I'm so anxious, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Try saying to yourself, I'm feeling anxious, but that's okay. This is just a sign that I'm stretching myself, that I'm growing.
It's about turning that negative self-talk into something more empowering. Almost like turning up the volume on your inner cheerleader.
Exactly. And remember what we discussed about Kierkegaard. He believed that faith, whether it's religious or secular, can be incredibly grounding when you're feeling anxious.
It's about finding something to hold on to when you feel like you're spiraling. Whether it's your belief in a higher power, your trust in the universe, or even just your faith in your own abilities.
Right. Having that anchor can help you ride the waves of anxiety without getting completely pulled under.
So we've talked about mindfulness, reframing, and faith. Are there any other practical tools we can use to navigate anxiety in a healthy way?
Absolutely. Things like regular exercise, getting enough sleep, and eating a balanced diet can make a huge difference in how you manage anxiety.
It's amazing how those basic self-care practices can have such a profound impact on our mental health. We often overlook them, but they're so important.
They really are. And don't underestimate the power of connection. Talking to someone you trust, whether it's a friend, family member, or therapist, can be incredibly helpful for processing your anxiety and gaining perspective.
It's like that old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved.
Exactly. And remember, seeking professional help is a sign of strength, not weakness. If your anxiety is feeling overwhelming or interfering with your daily life, don't hesitate to reach out to a therapist or counselor. They can provide you with the tools and support you need to navigate those challenges.
So much of what we've been talking about comes down to shifting our perspective on anxiety, seeing it not as something to be feared, but as a source of energy that we can learn to harness.
You got it. It's about taking control of the narrative and choosing to see anxiety not as the enemy, but as a part of ourselves that we can learn to work with, to use to our advantage, to become the best versions of ourselves.
So we've talked about reframing our mindset, about mindfulness, and even the importance of self-care and connection. It's all about seeing anxiety as this energy we can use, but I have to admit, it's still a little hard to grasp. Do you have any examples of people actually using anxiety as fuel?
We do. In fact, remember Søren Kierkegaard, the philosopher we talked about earlier? He wasn't just writing about anxiety from like a detached academic perspective. He actually struggled with anxiety deeply in his own life.
Really? I had no idea. I kind of just assumed he was a philosopher observing anxiety, not necessarily experiencing it firsthand.
Oh, he absolutely experienced it. Yeah, he was known for being incredibly anxious, dealing with like feelings of inadequacy, fear of failure. There are even accounts of him having panic attacks.
Wow, so he wasn't just theorizing about this dizziness of freedom, he was living it.
Exactly. And what's remarkable is that he didn't let anxiety paralyze him. Instead, he channeled that energy into his work. His writings explore anxiety, fear, and despair, but in a deeply personal and insightful way because he was grappling with those very things himself.
So he took this thing that caused him so much pain and turned it into something meaningful, something that has resonated with people for centuries.
That's the power of harnessing anxiety. It's not about pretending it doesn't exist or trying to force it away. It's about recognizing that it's there, accepting it, and then choosing to transform it into something positive.
It's like anxiety is this raw material that we can mold and shape. We can let it control us, or we can use it to create something beautiful, something that helps us grow.
That's a great way to put it. And remember, this doesn't just apply to philosophers or artists. It can apply to anyone, in any situation. Think about that work presentation you're dreading or that difficult conversation you need to have. Instead of letting anxiety shut you down, what if you use that energy to prepare, to focus, to find your voice?
So it's really about flipping the script on anxiety. Instead of asking, how do I make this feeling go away? We can ask, what can I do with this energy? How can I use this to my advantage?
Exactly. And that's what we hope you take away from this deep dive. Anxiety means you're alive. It means you're engaged with the world, you're facing challenges, you're striving for something more. Don't try to erase it, embrace it, learn from it, and most importantly, use it.
That's such a powerful message. Anxiety means you're alive. Now use it. And I think that's something we can all reflect on. We've covered a lot of ground today, but I hope our listeners will take these insights and start to see anxiety not as something to be feared, but as a source of energy and motivation for positive change in their lives.
Well said. It's about recognizing that anxiety is not the enemy. It's a part of us, and like any part of ourselves, we can learn to work with it, to use it to our advantage, to become the best versions of ourselves.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive for today. We've explored a lot, but as always, there's even more to discover. So here's a final thought for you to consider. What if, instead of asking yourself, how do I get rid of my anxiety, you asked, what can I create with this energy? What can I achieve with this fuel? Keep that question in mind as you navigate life's anxieties and see where it leads you. Until next time, dive deep and keep learning.